Professor, sir, we are eagerly waiting for the inaugural address.
Okay. Thank you so much. We are now at 7:20. Until what time do we have?
Sir, it's 8:30, sir.
8:30. So we have basically about 70 minutes. So I'll speak for a little while, and then maybe we can have some Q&A, which can be maybe posted on the chat box, or someone can ask questions. Is that okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Perfect, sir. Yes.
Great. So good evening, everyone. And first, let me begin by expressing my gratitude to Professor Bismi Gopalakrishnan, the head of the law school at the Mahatma Gandhi University, and one of the very distinguished academicians in law we have in Kerala and in our country. Very happy to associate with the programs that she organizes, and I'm also extremely grateful for the introduction and the remarks that was made by Mr. Babu and Professor Bismi Gopalakrishnan, and the very nice remarks by Ms. Merman, who talked on behalf of the students. The topic that we have for discussion today is law and social transformation. It's a very, as was mentioned by Professor Bismi Gopalakrishnan and Mr. Babu, it's an extremely important and very timely topic. So I plan to divide my remarks into three parts. Part one, I will look at some very basic concepts very briefly. What do we mean by law? What do we mean by social transformation? And what is the relationship between law and social transformation? Very, very briefly, some conceptual sort of theoretical issues so that we set the framework within which we discuss this topic. Then I move to part two, where we will look at reservation more deeply. What is reservation? What is its origin? What is the theoretical concept of reservation in our constitution? Because there's a lot of misunderstanding, and we want to be able to discuss that very clearly. And then in part three, we discuss the EWS case in the Supreme Court, which adjudicated on the basic structure of the 103rd Amendment to the Constitution, and by a very narrow majority of 3-2 upheld it. What was significant was that the Chief Justice of India struck down 103 as unconstitutional, as did Justice Ravindra Bhatt, who is very respected as being an expert in this area of law, constitutional law on reservations. 3 judges upheld the decision, so it is the amendment was upheld. I had the opportunity, as was mentioned, to argue this court at length in the Supreme Court, opening and closing the argument. So I'll be happy to share some of that experience and also take any questions on that. So these are the 3 parts that I thought I'll do. I'll spend, this is now 7:25, so about 10 minutes or so, 10 to 15 minutes till about 7:35 or 7:40 on the first part. Then I'll take another maybe 20-25 minutes till around 8 o'clock on the second part, and then we'll come from 8 to onwards. We'll discuss to 8:30, half an hour, or maybe a little bit more, the EWS case for about half an hour. So that's how I will divide it. Now, let me turn to the first question. How do we understand what is law? Now, that's a very simple and basic question that we are all very familiar with, but it's a very fundamental question of how do we see law, and there is really no consensus about what is the theoretical explanation of law. It has changed over the years in many ways, in many parts of the world. And in the Western world, we know that when I was a law student half a century ago, I started actually exactly half a century ago in 73 as a law student at a momentous time in Indian legal history. Soon after Keshwananda Bharati was decided, soon after the supersession of 3 judges to appoint Justice A.N. Ray, and then during our time in college, I'm saying this for a reason, 73 to 76, emergency was declared. One student in our class was arrested and taken away for simply protesting against it, doing nothing more than that, and was spent 19 months in jail. His name is Arun Jaitley. He was my classmate. He later became a famous political leader, and so on and so forth. So the point I wanted to make is that we also studied constitutional law from very eminent teachers. But while there was a huge tumult going on social transformation and on constitutional transformation outside our classroom, and we were participating in it in our personal capacities once we left the classroom, there was a big alienation of the classroom from what was going on in society. And so what I'm trying to do in this session, and I think I welcome this topic for this reason, is that we have to figure out a way to bring into the classroom the struggle over social transformation that is taking place outside in society. And like 50 years ago, again, we have reached a point where there are very, very serious struggles going on social transformation outside the classroom and over what we are studying in the classroom. And we have to be able to, in the classroom, analyze the struggle that's going on just outside our door, outside the walls of the classroom, and be able to figure out how to respond to it as citizens and human beings. We can't be alienated from it and simply studying, a few cases here and there. So we start with the question, as I said, what is law? And the classical definition of Austin, that law is the command of the sovereign, has transformed a lot. And now, even if you look at the dictionaries, the dictionaries have become much more democratic in their definition of law, and they say law is a system of rules recognized by a community. So there's a delinking between command, delinking from sovereign, delinking from the state, and says a system is recognized by a community. And a community may have a political organization like the state, but a community recognizes suddenly becomes the source of law as regulating the actions of its members, which may be enforced by imposition of penalties for their violation. So suddenly we've seen law becoming, far more democratic in its theory itself. So if you apply this definition, then you say something is not a law unless it is really recognized. Even if it's a law issued by a sovereign, it doesn't meet this definition if it does not have recognition by the community to which it applies, regardless of whether that community is the whole world, as in international law, or a nation state, or subnational entities, or local entities, or rules imposed by institutions internally, or organizations internally. The community to which the rules apply must be recognized by the community, and that becomes a source of power and authority. That goes very well with the concept in the Objectives Resolution of the Indian Constitution, which says, adopted in 1946 as the Constituent Assembly began, which says that the all power and authority of India shall be derived from its people. All power and authority, not just power given by law, but authority shall be derived from the people. The very word democracy means kratos is power, demos is people. So democracy also means power is held by people. So there's a big transformation going on about the location and nature of power, of which the Constitution and the Constituent Assembly was at the forefront and at a cutting edge of all this discussion. Now, So as we go into the question of law and social transformation, we have to say, what is this law that is going to transform society? Where is it going to come from? Is it a top-down idea of law? Is it a bottom-up idea of law? What is the process of recognizing that something is law? A positivist formal approach that law is law because an institution of the state authorized, the legislature, the executive, the judiciary has issued a law, is actually in reality a very obsolete concept. That without democratic consent, it has no legitimacy. Earlier we used to say it has no legitimacy. Now we can say that actually it may not even have legality. In fact, I would argue that there is no legality without democratic legitimacy. You can't, for example, in India, with 15 to 20% of the votes of the entire population of the country, say 30% of the votes in a parliamentary election, you can rule this country. So if you get 30% or 40% of the votes of the country, it means that in terms of numbers, you're only getting the endorsement of 20% of this country, of 1,400 million people. With that, can you control the fundamental ideas about law and justice in this country? Whoever it is, whether it is emergency, 42nd Amendment, what's going on now, it's not about politics, but where does the law get not only its legitimacy, but also its legality? So we as lawyers, we should argue, I feel, in a democratic country, we should give up the colonial and pre-colonial and feudal Raja-based ideas of law, and we should argue that the legality of itself of law, not just the legitimacy, has to be democratic and has to have deep democratic consent, which means we have to think of the ways in which law is produced and how we can make it much more democratic. So that itself is part of social transformation. The very transforming the idea of law itself is part of, it's a very fundamental building block of social transformation. Because you have a top-down idea of law and legal change, and that is transformed into a democratic idea, and that's at the heart of social change and social transformation. A transformation literally means a marked change in form, nature, or appearance of anything. So when we say society, social, it means relating to society or the way society is organized. So we are looking actually in this discussion for this hour and a half, we're looking at changes in the structures of society, the way society is organized, what its structures are, and what role law can play in transforming those structures on which society is based. So we've looked at law, we've looked at the idea of transformation, we've looked at the society. I want to look at one more thing before we move on, which is the idea of justice. And it relates, and where does it come from? So what is justice? And why is it that this topic doesn't say law, justice and social transformation, or justice, law and social transformation? Because justice, let's look at very quickly at the literal meaning of the word justice. It comes from two words, jus, J-U-S, and stis, S-T-I-C-E. J-U-S means the right value, the right norm for anything. That's why you can say, I want just half a glass of water. Or you can say the Supreme Court's decision on EWS was just or was not just. You're using the same word to say, I want half a cup of water, and the Supreme Court's decision is just or unjust. Why? Because you're asserting that whatever you're talking about, the quantity of water or the decision of a Supreme Court meets or does not meet the right norm, the norm that you consider right, by which you measure whether something is right or wrong. So for example, if you say, okay, what is my idea? What is the value by which I decide whether a Supreme Court judgment is right or wrong? When I apply that, I find EWS as just or unjust. That's what we'll discuss later. Or the norm for me for a right amount of water is half a glass, so I just want half a glass. So use means the right value, but in the context of law, use only means the value of right, the value of right human conduct. In other words, the standard that tells you what human conduct is right or wrong. Indeed, that is the only question that law is concerned with. All of law is concerned with only one question. And that is human conduct right or wrong? And if it's wrong, what are the consequences? Nothing else. Okay. So like medicine is concerned with only one question, this discipline of medicine, to which Dr. Bismi Gopalakrishnan's father and my mother both were members of that profession. So we grew up with that. So the only question that medicine is concerned with is a human being healthy or not healthy? And if they're not healthy, what can we do about it to restore their health? Like that. Similarly, the only question that law is concerned with is human conduct right or wrong? Now, the norm by which we answer that question is what we call justice. Now, the stis means it's eternal. It stands forever. So the norm of right conduct that stands forever, is eternal, is justice. So you can say justice means eternal values. So when the Constitution says to secure to ourselves justice, social, economic, and political, it doesn't refer to court decisions. It means that we are establishing a nation, an India, where social, economic, and political relations shall be based upon the standards of right conduct that we are laying down in this Constitution in the preamble. All social, political, and economic relations shall be judged by these standards of rightness and wrongness. That's the assertion made in the preamble. So, so justice tells us if the whole purpose of the legal system is to decide what types of human conduct are right and what types are wrong, then justice is a standard that tells us how to distinguish between right and wrong. So then law becomes, whether it comes from the bottom up or the top down, it becomes an instrument to ensure that human conduct remains consistent with the values that are set in the standards prescribed as justice. So when human conduct is consistent with those standards, we say there is justice. Justice is upheld. Justice is secured when human conduct is consistent with the values that are set out in the that constitute the idea of justice. Likewise, when we say that human conduct is not consistent with those norms, then we say the human conduct is unjust. So law is a set of rules, either from the bottom up or top down, that will ensure that human conduct conforms to the standards of right conduct, which is what we call justice. So if you look at our Constitution, we see basically 4 values, core values, right? In terms of how human beings treat each other, and then some normative institutions. So the 4 values are, we all know, liberty, equality, fraternity, and dignity. Individual equality, individual liberty, individual dignity, and fraternity amongst us all. And the institutions to achieve this outcome of therefore, only that conduct is right conduct in India, which respects between people, which respects these 4 norms: equality, freedom, or liberty, dignity, and fraternity. And to ensure as an instrument to produce law and to have an outcome that will ensure this the upholding of these values, we have a certain political, ideological institutions established, such as norms or ideologies established, such as democracy, secularism, socialism, right? These are prescribed because these are ideologies which we believe should be applied to to state institutions that produce and implement and execute the laws, and to govern human conduct, that will ensure that these 4 values are actually realized and upheld. So this is the framework in which. Now, the last point I want to make, because it's 7:40, I want to end this part. The last point I want to make is, what is the Constitution, right? So I take, if you look at the Constitution of India, I'll see if I can find a physical copy of it. I have it on my laptop. It's in the other room. what is a constitution? People say it's a book of of basic rules and laws, the Grundnorm, the fundamental norms of our country. I read the constitution in two ways. One is I see the word constitution as a present continuous verb, not as a noun. So I say Professor Bismi Gopalakrishnan has decided to constitute a committee, and the constitution of the committee will take place at a meeting. Right. So the word constitution means the process of creating that committee will take place in a meeting tomorrow. Okay. So when I say the Constitution of India, I say it is the process of creating India. It's a story, it's a framework, it's a framework within which a process is taking place. That's very relevant to the idea of social transformation. A process of creating India is taking place. That's why the preamble says, we the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute. It doesn't say, we the people of India, having constituted India into a socialist, secular, democratic republic, and to secure to all its citizens and so on. It doesn't say having constituted, it says to constitute. So that shows us two things. One is, it is the beginning of a process of constituting India. And second, it shows us that what is being constituted is a brand new India. It's not 5,000 years old or 10,000 years old. It is a brand new India that doesn't exist as yet. So but they still say to constitute India into a republic. So there is a transformation there. And this is the fundamental constitutional framework for social transformation. The transformation of India into a sovereign socialist democratic republic, right? So we the people of India, Now, what does India mean there? So there what we are saying is, the Constitution is recognizing that we come to this table as people of India, recognizing that there are different concepts of India pre-existing. I say there are, there is a Raj era, a Raja era, a Raj era, and a Swaraj era in India. They all have different approaches to what India is. There are theocratic approaches, there are all kinds of authoritarian approaches. So what we're saying, we the people of this geographical entity, this subcontinent, with different approaches to ideas of India, we are coming together to constitute India into a sovereign socialist democratic republic. So that process of constitution is what we mean by saying the Constitution of India, the process of constitution, the transformation of various political entities. Even as they made this declaration, we were coming together as presidencies, former British India, large number of princely states that had their own, there is a Manoj Bagade, may kindly switch off his microphone. Mr. Manoj Bagade. Mr. Manoj Bagade, yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Mr. Manoj Bagade, please, yes, thank you so much, because the noise is coming through. So there were princely states, each of which had been given back their sovereignty by the British in the Independence of India, the Independence of India Act, Indian Independence Act of the British Parliament. So that entity called India, the constituent, recognizes Constituent Assembly, but I don't believe that the legality or legitimacy of the Constituent Assembly comes from that. It comes from the freedom struggle. But it recognizes that there were many societies, many approaches to society, many ideas of India, and we're going to transform all these ideas into an India which is described, the contours of which, the basic norms and frameworks of which is basically set out in the preamble to the Constitution and the Constituent Assembly resolution. But in the Constituent Assembly there were 4 or 5 forces that were conflicting each other in the Constitution that did not agree with this idea of India. Some wanted a Hindu India. Some wanted a democratic mod, the kind of India that's in the preamble. Some wanted a pure autocracy. Some wanted a pure capitalist country. Some wanted a communist country. But the preamble sets out a framework, and then the genius of Dr. Ambedkar is he provided all these people some space in the Constitution for their own ideas. And that's why the Constitution has survived. Normally, the victor says only my ideas in the Constitution, puts everyone out, and the Constitution gets overthrown. But if you look at the Constitution, there's no time for that. That's a completely different topic. But there are 5 forces that are working within the Constitution against each other, and the conflict that was taking place in society during and before and for centuries before the freedom struggle was brought into the Constitution by providing mechanisms and frameworks for social transformation in accordance with the democratic process. And that's what we're witnessing now. So I'll just conclude here. I'm 7 minutes beyond my time on part 1. So I'll conclude here by saying that I see the Constitution, as I said, in 2 ways. One is as a process of creating a new India, as against many visions that existed in India from the bottom up, right? And secondly, I see the Constitution of India as a site of struggle between conflicting forces, and all forces have their instrument to which they can advance their own causes, and the Constitution allows them to do that. So therefore, we need to consciously understand the different forces that are operating within the Constitution, the nature of the struggle. The Indian Constitution is a very unique document. It is a document of living conflict and struggle inside the Constitution, and we have to engage in that struggle and advance the view that we believe in. That's what our responsibility is. We must fight for in a peaceful constitutional manner for our own idea of society. Ultimately, the Constitution sets forth not an idea just of a polity. It sets forth the idea of a society, which is why Article 38 says that the main mission of the entire republic is to secure a social order, not an economic order or political order, a social order in which justice, social, economic, and political shall inform all institutions of national life. So the Constitution is a fundamental framework for social transformation of India, because Article 38 says that the purpose of the Constitution is to establish a new social order, not economic order or political orders, social order in which justice, I've said justice means the norms of right conduct, shall inform all institutions of national life. The norms of conduct that are in the preamble shall inform all institutions of national life. So when we talk of law and social transformation, the first part I want to conclude by saying we talked about what is law and so on, but we understand that the Constitution of India is in and by itself the primary instrument of legal instrument of social transformation, and it is in conflict with many historical forces of social transformation, which do not want to yield their struggle of social transformation to this Constitution. They want to continue their own struggle to establish a Hindu Rashtra, or a military rule, or a capitalist country. They want to continue that, or a communist country. So they want, independently of the Constitution, to continue their struggle for social transformation. So let us understand the broader context that we are living in the midst. We are only in the 8th decade of our independence. United States was in its 8th decade of independence, exactly our age when it had its civil war, in which 2% of the people were killed. And they fought that civil war over the simple issue of whether a population that was smaller than our scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, smaller than our Muslims, were entitled to be equal and free, namely their African-American slaves. And one side insisted that Lincoln said this nation cannot exist half slave and half free. Everyone must be equal and free. And the people in the South of the United States said, no, we want to maintain slavery. We are white people. We are superior to these people. They are our slaves. We have a social order. We want to preserve that social order. They went to war on that in the 8th decade of their Constitution. And we are also having a very serious struggle in our country in the 8th decade of our Constitution. So let me end there on part 1. Now I come to part 2, which I will try to finish in 10 minutes, and then we move to part 3, which is 10 or 15 minutes. We move to part 3, which is the EWS case. If there are any questions on part 1 or part 2, I'm saying this separately because you can, after this, you can ask questions and I can answer. We'll try to find time for that. Maybe you can post some questions and Professor Bismi can read those questions out and I can answer them. Part 2, what is reservation? So you understand reservation, you have to go back to the first roundtable conference which that took place in 1930-31 in London. Why did this conference take place? As we all know, the British were preparing a colonial constitution that will not, there is a colonial Government of India Act, which was like the Constitution of British India, to replace the 1919 Act. It was bound to do that by the 1919 Act itself. So they were preparing a new Government of India Act. And they did so with a committee that did not include any Indians. The Indians protested rightly, said we have to have a voice in the Government of India Act. So as a compromise, they said, okay, we will not include you in the committee, but we'll hold a series of conferences, and 3 conferences were held, where we'll invite the main representatives of major sections of Indians and ask them to give us their views on the proposed constitution. So it was a constitutional convention representing the depressed classes of India. We today call them scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, backward classes, other backward classes, and so on. But those days they were called depressed classes. Were two people, one of who was Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. And Dr. Ambedkar, Baba Sahib Ambedkar, made some extraordinarily important interventions in the first roundtable conference, which in my view are the founding documents of our constitution and our constitutional law. He submitted a memorandum on behalf of the depressed classes. He said, as a prelude, he said to the British that when you leave, it's only a matter of time, but when you leave, if you don't put in safeguards, India will be ruled by an oligarchy or an aristocracy. He foresaw certainly that when the British left, there would only be 2 powerful forces in India: the Muslim rulers who ruled India before the British, and the Hindu upper caste, who are the dominant Hindu group in the country. There would be only 2. Now, and he said this aristocracy of these 2 would form an oligarchy. Oligarchy means monarchy is ruled by one person, oligarchy is ruled by a few people. So he said this is a big concern for us. Actually, the situation became much worse because the Muslim elite also packed up and left India. The British were kicked out, the Muslims voluntarily left and formed a different country, which means from 47 till today, we have an oligarchy of only the Hindu dominant communities. There is no group in this country that even today has the power to challenge them. Earlier, the Hindu dominant communities were subordinate to the British and the Mughals at the Muslims at different points of time. But once they were out, they became the dominant group. And now the key social transformation challenges: will power be shared? Will this oligarchy allow the majority of people in this country, the majority of Hindus, to share power? Or will we maintain a social order that ensures that only they have unchallenged power in this country? That's a challenge of social transformation we are facing in the countries. But in this context, to avoid this prospect that India will be ruled by an oligarchy, Dr. Ambedkar made a proposal. In his memorandum, he listed 8 safeguards for the depressed classes. Safeguard number 4 and number 5 was about representation. So he made a speech in which he said, all the people who have come from India are here, and we all agree that we want a responsible government in India. A responsible means an elected government in India, responsible to the people. But he said the depressed classes of this country want more than that. What do they want? They want a representative state. Now, what is a representative state? He defined that in these 2 conditions. Condition, as I said, number 4 and number 5. 4, he said, was due and adequate representation of depressed classes in the legislature through having separate electorates for 5 years initially, then that was made 10 years, and then joint electorates, but with reservation, so that we know that all depressed class communities will have due representation in the legislature, because he felt that otherwise these communities in the face of this oligarchy will not be able to have representation in the legislature. Second, in safeguard number 5, Baba Sahib Ambedkar said, we want due and adequate representation of all communities, including the oligarchy communities. Due and adequate. Due means in accordance with the proportion of their population, and adequate means sufficient for the small communities for the representation to be effective. Due and adequate representation of all communities in the judiciary and the executive. How? He said establish public service commissions. He never used the word backward classes. He said all communities. He did not use the word reservation. He said we must have representation. How? By ensuring that by regulating the recruitment into public into public employment, so as to ensure the due and adequate representation of all communities. So when communities were overrepresented, for some time you reduce their recruitment. When they're underrepresented, you increase their recruitment. At all times ensure that the judiciary and the executive have representation for all communities, because that, he said very correctly, is the very foundation of democracy. You can't have just electoral democracy unless the state represents all the people. The concerns of those people who are not represented will not only will not be addressed, but these others will become beggars in front of those who are monopolizing the executive and the judiciary, begging for for relief, as they were doing with the British. So what's the whole point in having independence? We might just, if we want to, if the majority of the people in this country have to beg before anyone for justice from power, then why did we throw out the British at all? We could have begged before the British. What difference does it make? So to avoid that, we must have everyone represented in the judiciary, all communities and the executive. This was the principle. Therefore, the first and main point I want to make is we must understand that the issue is not reservation, it is representation. The demand is for representation. Reservation is only an instrument for representation. So when I argued before the Supreme Court, I told the Supreme Court that if we find a better tool for representation than reservation, we will throw reservation into the Arabian Sea. Reservation is actually a system of chaturvarnya, where roles and responsibilities and vocations are reserved for different communities. The last thing that the non-dominant communities want, the depressed classes want, is reservation. They want representation. But reservation had been developed in the south of India by some rulers, and in Maharashtra by Sahu Maharaj, by the British in Madras Presidency, by the Raja of Mysore, the Rajas of Travancore, to provide space for non-Brahmin Hindu communities. And so the word reservation came from the practice of these elites, not from the backward class movement, so-called backward class, the depressed classes movement. They demanded regulation of recruitment of into public employment so as to ensure due and adequate representation of all communities. That's what their demand was. So the point I want to make in part 2 is that the purpose of reservation is representation. And I argued this very strongly in the Supreme Court, because right from the Constituent Assembly, the dominant caste wrongly consider reservation as a tool for compensation for past discrimination, alleviation of economic backwardness and economic weakness. It is on that basis they say that reservation for economically weaker section is actually feasible under the Constitution, because the theory is that reservation is a tool for uplifting people from poverty. It is not. I argued, but the majority judgment did not address my argument. I said, look, if it is representation, you cannot give reservation to people who are from communities that are overrepresented. You have to give representation to communities that are not represented or are underrepresented. And I said reservation is a dangerous tool. It's a chaturvarnya tool. We are against reservation. We want only representation. So do not reserve seats for the overrepresented, because that is Chaturvarnya. We are going back to Chaturvarnya. So we don't want that. Okay. So that is the main point. Then the question is, can we have the reservation on the basis of economic criteria? And the answer is, economic criteria are irrelevant to reservation, because the Constitution provides for equality. That equality also came from the struggle of the poor people of this country. Until 1950, in a constitution drafted with Dr. Ambedkar as the chairman of the drafting committee, not a single constitution or constitutional document or charter of a state in India, whether it was British, whether it was Maharajas, whether it was the Muslim rulers, not a single charter provided for any equality for common people. The first time a charter of the country provided for equality for everyone in the subcontinent, men and women, rich and poor, was in the 1950 Constitution. So this depressed classes struggle for equality. Depressed classes want equality. They want representation also, equal representation. So the issue of whether reservation violates equality is an exception to equality is really a part of the privileged caste discourse on constitutional law. It has never been accepted by Dr. Ambedkar or these others who follow his way of approaching the Constitution and constitutional law, who see reservation as only a tool of representation, and the struggle being not for reservation but for representation. Let me stop there. That's part 2. I think I've caught up on my flight, because it's now almost caught up. It's 8:02. I wanted to move on to EWS at the end of part 2, and that's part 3. Now, if you agree, Professor Bismi, we can take 5 minutes here to see if there are any questions on part 1 and part 2 before we move on to part 3. Is Professor Bismi here with us? Hello. So I think she's. Can anyone else hear me?
Sir, hello, sir. Good evening, sir.
Yeah, you can all hear me. Very good. Okay, so I think Professor Bismi is not here with us. Are there any questions? I'll just maybe she's not here, so I'll finish the whole thing, and then we can take questions.
Sir, good evening. I have a question, sir. Can I ask?
Mr. Azad Singh, we'll come back to that, because I don't want to change this format without Professor Bismi's permission.
Sure, sir.
So let me finish part 3 quickly, and then we'll leave time for questions. And
For sure, sir.
Finish that in about 10-15 minutes.
For sure.
So part 3, in this context, we come to EWS. Okay. Now EWS was brought as an amendment into the Constitution, Article 15 and 16, 15.6, 16.6, on the basis of Article 46 of the Constitution. And we can just read Article 46 of the Constitution. That's what the government's, the statement of objects and reasons actually said, that it is to implement Article 46. So let's look at 46, because the court also used that argument. So Article 46 says, the title is Promotion of Educational and Economic Interests of Scheduled Castes, Scheduled Tribes and other weaker sections. Okay. First it says Scheduled Castes, Scheduled Tribes and other weaker sections. The state shall promote with special care the educational and economic interests of the weaker sections of the people, and in particular of the Scheduled Castes, and in particular of the Scheduled Castes and the Scheduled Tribes, and shall protect them from social injustice and all forms of exploitation. So the prerequisites, the group to which 46 applies, must be, number 1, education. They must be weaker sections. Number 1. What is that criterion for weaker sections? They must be victims of social injustice and all forms of exploitation. Social injustice and all forms of exploitation. Now you take a section of people or sections of people that are weaker because of social injustice and all forms of exploitation. Right? And then what do? You protect their educational and economic interests, particularly amongst them scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Now, what has the amendment actually done? Let's read the amendment 15.5 and 15.6. Let's take 16.6. It's a little simpler to do, or 15.6 is actually a little simpler. Let's look at 16.6. I'm just scrolling down to 16, 15. Yeah, 15.6. Nothing in this article or subclause G of clause 1 of article 19 or clause 2 of article 19 shall prevent the state from making any special provision for the advancement of any economically weaker sections of citizens. So far so good, right? Any economically weaker sections of citizens. Okay, let's stop there. Now, how do we define economically weaker sections? If it is based on 46, it must be victims of social injustice and exploitation. And it must be, and it should have said any educationally and economically weaker sections, if it is based on 46. But education was dropped. Fine, that's the discretion of Parliament. So basically, we are saying this is not coming from 46. It does not need to come from 46. It is exercise of constituent power. The Parliament can put anything it wants into it if it has 2/3 majority. But then we have to say that it's not related to 46. But it says economically weaker sections of citizens other than the classes mentioned in clauses 4 and 5. Okay. And then it goes on with other explanations. But this is the group that is being given the benefit of EWS, right? Any economically weaker sections. Now, how does this affect social transformation? Does it affect social transformation? This is the question for us. So the Supreme Court discussed this from three main aspects, the majority judgments. Firstly, they said economic justice is distinct from social justice. And there is nothing preventing Parliament from looking at people who are only victims of economic injustice. And honestly, I have no difficulty with that. I have no difficulty with that statement because it is a logical statement. You know, Parliament is not limited to simply saying it all. You know, only social injustice can be recognized. Although you are delinking from 46 because 46 requires social injustice and exploitation. But fine, they have the right to do that. So let's accept that. Now, and it is distinct from social justice. But then the logic that follows, and I made this argument in the alternative in the Supreme Court. If you say that, then you cannot exclude economically weaker sections simply because they come under clause 4 and 5. They're entitled to OBC and SC/ST reservations. Why? Because I know many actual cases today, you know, I don't want to get no time to get into the details, but I know actual cases where there are incredibly poor people. So in Kerala, there is one group of people who do pottery, who are part of 79 communities who are entitled together to 3% reservations. Small community, but extremely poor people. And they have never got reservation, ever. Because there is no set aside for them. The set aside is 3% for 79 small communities. They've never got reservations. Now, the Constitution says because they are in a community, now sometimes they're called scheduled caste, sometimes they're called backward class. They don't even know what's happening to them. They're being kicked around like a football. One day to scheduled caste and one day to OBC. When they're kicked back to OBC, the very poor people are asked to refund scholarships that they got. They're dismissed from jobs they got as scheduled caste, whereas it's the government that gave them scheduled caste status. They didn't ask for it. Then another set of bureaucrats come and withdraw it, and then penalize them. Even criminal cases have been filed against them. Now, but because the government, they are born into a family, a very poor family, they're a member of a community, the government puts labels on them. The community is OBC, SC/ST, right? Now, when do you become a member of the clause? When do you become an OBC is the question. Do you become an OBC by birth because you're born into a family and that family is a member of a community, and that community, without its asking for it, has been put into this category and that category? Do you become a member of that community and therefore you're not entitled to be considered an economically weaker section? And people who have got 66,600 rupees maximum per month salary, so many acres of land, so much of urban property, they are given reservation when you are not getting reservation in the name of being economically weaker sections? So actually what this clause does is it provides socially and educationally forward classes reservation with a creamy layer exclusion. So you have to belong to a socially and educationally forward class, because otherwise you would be backward class or SC/ST. And that's a social category, socially and educationally backward. So socially and educationally forward, not socially and educationally backward. So you have to belong to a social class in order to get economic reservations. Where is the justice of that? Why do you call it economically weaker sections? Why don't you simply say we want to give reservations to socially and educationally forward classes with a creamy layer exclusion? Say that in the Constitution. Let's test the constitutionality of that. Why do you say economically weaker sections other than the classes and then not define who these are? What does other than mean? I can understand if a member of this very poor community applies, they do, as an OBC or an SC, and they get reservations and they are given a seat, then they cannot be also considered under EWS. I can understand that. But simply because you're born into a community, are you not bringing back the caste system? Saying mere birth makes you a member of an OBC class or SC and ST? Will even mere, see, when I joined the government, I'm not a government servant, but if I joined the government, I would have become entitled to a pension, eligible for a pension. But I don't become a pensioner until I actually start receiving the pension. Similarly, you may be eligible to be considered OBC or SC/ST, but you do not become OBC or SC/ST unless you actually invoke that category and you're given that status for some administrative purpose by the state. Then you become a member of the OBC, not otherwise. And so we argued all this. It was accepted by the broadly. I'm not getting to the technicalities of the argument. There's no time. Because I want to stop in 2-3 minutes and then get questions so that we have 15 minutes for questions. But none of this was addressed. So the question is, yes, economic justice is distinct from, I don't think it is distinct, because let me make this last point. Actually, OBC especially and SC/ST especially are actually economic criteria. They are not social criteria. So let's take OBC. OBC, to become a class in the to become a member of the backward class, any group has to comply with about 15 to 20 criteria, which are under 4 heads: social, economic, political, and representation. If you satisfy these criteria, then you will be included, the norms, you'll be included as an OBC. Who is in the OBC? We have Brahmins in the OBC, we have Kshatriyas in the OBC, we have Baniyas in the OBC, we have Shudras in the OBC, and we have Panchamas in the OBC. We have Muslims in the OBC, we have Christians in the OBC, we have Buddhists in the OBC, we have Jains and Sikhs in the OBC. Based on their, basically economic is different from financial. There are no economic criteria that is prescribed for EWS. They're all financial. Economic is a broader concept which takes into account social, political, representational, developmental, all kinds of considerations. We have economic poverty is an economic concept that looks at many criteria. So the distinction between economically weaker section, economic justice or injustice, and social justice or injustice is actually wrong. Social justice does not necessarily include economic justice, but economic justice does include social justice. You cannot take out social justice from economic justice without totally destroying the very concept of economic as against financial. So what you have done is you have economic reservations are actually OBC, mainly OBC and SC/ST. Why I'm saying also SC/ST, because any community that has suffered from untouchability, regardless of which Varna you are, is entitled to be in the scheduled caste depending on the degree of untouchability. But I gave to the Supreme Court a list of Brahmin communities that are in and Savarna communities that have been in the OBC. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's community is an OBC community, although they are said to come from the Bania section of society. And because he apparently comes from a community that does suffer from discrimination, that does suffer from economic disadvantage. And rightfully they have been made OBC, and rightfully they have been receiving reservations for a long time. So if there are poorer sections of so-called dominant communities that are not getting reservations, the answer is for those communities to become OBCs, as Prime Minister Modi's community did, and get reservation. And not a single other OBC or SC/ST protested when these genuinely poor people were given reservations. And no one still protests. I think that they're rightly given. So the Supreme Court also wrongly keeps on saying OBC is caste-based reservation and EWS is economic reservation. Actually, it's exactly the opposite. OBC is an economic reservation and EWS is a caste-based reservation reserved only for the socially and educationally forward elite sections of society with a creamy layer removed. But this argument has not been dealt with or addressed. So what kind of, in conclusion, before we take questions, what kind of transformation are we making? It is a transformation, but this transformation is reversing the trajectory from moving towards a more inclusive, more equal, more representative society by setting aside 10% of all seats in classrooms and all office jobs. 10% are set aside for economically weaker sections, as defined, as I said, 66,000 rupees a month or less, and so on, up to that level, and with land, urban and rural, and so on. That level, 10% are set aside for those communities that are already overrepresented. So we are removing 10% from, admittedly from the general category, but the possibility of using that 10% to give opportunities in the general category for those who come from unrepresented communities being taken away by those who are excluded, who are from unrepresented communities, excluded by creamy layer exclusion, but could come into the general category and improve representation. That is also being taken away. So this is an example of how law and the Constitution can actually reverse the kind of social transformation to a more egalitarian, equal society that is set out in the Constitution. It's 8:18, so I'm going to stop here, although I have a lot more to say, and we'll take questions for 10-15 minutes and then conclude. I wonder if Professor Bismi Gopalakrishnan is back.
Sir, I'm actually here. I'm listening.
I was earlier asking for you. Then I think.
Yes, sir. Yes, I was listening. I was trying to resolve the technical issue that we are facing, sir. That is why, sir.
So anyway, we have 10 minutes or so.
Yes.
At 8:30 for questions. So I'm sort of broadly on time, although I would have liked to give 5 more minutes.
Yes,
One of the participants was about to ask a question.
So may I ask?
Yes.
So actually, I wanted to know what's the origin of the existing caste system, when and how the population has been
Sorry, ma'am. Not able to hear you. Your voice is not clear. Not clear. Can you try again? Maybe the bandwidth. Can you try again? I think it's a range issue probably. Can you try again?
Am I audible now?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. So I was asking, what is the origin of the existing caste system? Like when and how the population have been bifurcated into scheduled caste, tribes, and OBCs in general.
Okay, I'll answer that question. Let's make the questions brief. I'll answer the question. What is the origin of the caste system and the bifurcation of community? Very, very important question, Ms. Imanshi. Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Azad, do you have you've been trying to ask a question?
Yes, sir. I have a question too, sir.
Yes.
My question is, sir, can we justify democracy when we have people of different social backgrounds, and let's say people of one belief or a religion or a caste are more in number and have their representation at all the higher levels? Will the
Yes.
concept of democracy will have an adverse effect on the minority?
Okay. Justify democracy. Will democracy have an adverse effect on the minority? Very good.
Yes, sir.
I'll take a few questions and then I'll answer as quickly
Sure,
as
sir.
possible.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Sir,
thank
good
you.
evening.
Good evening.
Sir, can I ask the question?
Sure.
Sir, can we say that preamble of Indian Constitution is a social contract?
You're Mr. I can only see
Avnish.
A. I'm sorry.
Avnish Kumar.
Avnish.
Yes.
Avnish. Yeah. Is the Indian Constitution a social contract? Right?
Preamble. Basically,
It's a
preamble.
preamble of a social. It's a preamble, a social contract. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Avnish.
Sir, good evening, sir.
Excellent questions. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. Who is speaking?
Sir, you have stated, I'm Khalilur
Mr.
Rahman. Sir.
Right. Yes, Mr. Rahman.
Yes, sir. You have stated reservation was not the purpose. Representation was the is the ends. So, what would
Yes.
be the alternatives according to you for the present reservation system?
Yes, alternatives for reservation. As you mean, what are alternate tools for representation? Correct.
Yes.
Examples
Yes,
of
sir.
alternate tools for representation. Very good. Excellent. I'll answer that.
Sir,
Yes.
good evening, sir.
evening,
Sir, this
sir.
is Girish.
Yes, Mr. Girish.
Yeah, sir, legislature and executive can also bring social transformation, but that has to be sanctified by judiciary.
Yes.
Is it? My question is only when the judiciary sanctifies or considers it to be constitutional, then only the transformation which is brought through legislature or executive is taken into consideration.
Yes. Okay. So you're saying that that you're asking a question or you're saying something? What is your point?
Sir, my question is, can the social transformation be made only when it is sanctified by the judiciary?
Okay.
Yeah.
Does the judiciary have a kind of veto? Does the judiciary have a last word?
Yes, sir.
Have a last
Yes.
word on social transformation. Very good.
Yes, sir.
Excellent. All excellent questions. Yeah.
Sir, this is Toshita.
Yes, Toshita.
Okay, so I had a question regarding when we connect social transformation and the ninth schedule that we have,
Yes.
where certain laws are protected from being reviewed,
Yes.
right? Is that
Yes.
a right way to ensure the society moves towards a particular direction? Is it the right way to ensure social transformation, or do you actually think even those laws, it's not fair to have a schedule as such, and even those laws needs to be reviewed and amended according to time?
Yes. No, that can be answered very quickly. The courts have already said that ninth schedule is subject to the review on the basis of basic structure. So they cannot violate basic structure. So you can review laws in even the ninth schedule to test against the basic structure. So so that's, which means that you cannot test it for being inconsistent with other provisions of the Constitution as you can other pieces of legislation. But certainly they can't put anything into the ninth schedule which violates the basic structure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sorry, this is Ochieng.
Yes, Mr. Ochieng.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask,
Where are you from, Mr. Ochieng?
I am in Kenya right now. I'm a student at MG University, but my origin is Tanzania. Africa.
Tanzania. I've been to Tanzania, actually. Such a beautiful place. Yeah.
Okay, nice to hear that, sir.
East
You're
Africa,
welcome.
the most beautiful places in the world, actually. Yeah.
Yes, sir, you're welcome again.
Yeah.
So
Yes, sir.
my concern is we are looking about social transformation and the law.
Yes.
Now, I was just having one doubt, what should affect the other between the law and transformation? Because we see there are things which happen in the society, and the law has to follow them to effect them, or the law has to begin then to effect the changes in the society.
Yeah.
A good example is what you have been discussing about. We have seen the history of India, where does it come from, and how it transformed where it is now. So, which has to effect this either the social transformation to begin, then the law should follow social transformation, or
Excellent. Yes.
yes.
So is the law a lead or a lag factor in social
Yes, sir.
transformation? Right. That's your question. Okay. Thank you, sir, Mr. Ochieng. Anyone else? Now we are at 8:26. Now I'm in Professor Bismi Gopalakrishnan's hand because I have only 4 minutes left.
Sir?
Yes, ma'am.
Sir, I think they really want an answer from you, sir. Like, that's why the question.
So do we have time to go over another
Yes, sir.
5-10
Yes,
minutes?
sir. No issue.
Okay. In which case I'll be happy. Yeah, I'll be. I mean, I'm on my part. I'm ready to spare any amount of time.
Sir, may I ask a question, sir?
Yes, sir, Mr. Rao.
I'm Sanjay Rajgopal Rao. I'm
Yes,
from
sir.
Kerala, Cochin. I'm 56 years now, but lately I have been doing LLB in a government law college.
Yes.
So I'm very much interested in my community's development. It's a Saraswat non-Brahmin community.
Yes.
And from 93, National Backward Commission had given us the status of OBC in central list for central government positions.
Yes.
But none of us, a small community, none of us were able to get much benefit of
What is the spelling of the community's name, sir?
Saraswat non-Brahmin.
No, what is it? What is the spelling? Because I'm not able to hear it.
SARASWATH.
SARASWATH. Saraswat.
Non-Brahmin.
Saraswat non-Brahmin. Okay, sir.
Actually, it was established in 1938.
Yes.
Before that, this community was called Devadasi in Kerala.
Okay.
The Konkani-speaking people.
Yes.
Very few members were there.
Yes.
But from my father's generation, people started getting the job. My father retired from customs, joined as a LD clerk and retired as assistant collector. But his teacher was also good position in a deputy director youth welfare board. From a teacher's position. Like that, a few examples are there of successful, but there are a lot of poor people in the community whose children were not getting education benefits. So I tried with the official gazette and tried with the revenue officers and village officers, and finally got for my son and myself a certificate that we are OBC. But even my son did not get admission in Tamil Nadu. They said that whichever state you are, you should be a OBC in that state list.
Correct. So what's the question, sir?
Actually, we are not in the list of Kerala also. Kerala list also, we are not OBC. But now we have a proposal to make it an economically backward commission in socially forward communities. Yes. So we are trying for that status and try to get educational rights for our children of our community members.
Okay.
We have already proceeded and talked to the tribunal. We have had a discussion with them. They said they will come positively with it. Okay. So what I'm asking is that even despite having appearing in central list, why not state list have not admitted us?
Yes. No, this is a case. For example, EWS are not on the Delhi backward class list.
Yes.
Though there are many EWS in Delhi, they are not on the OBC list in Delhi, but they are in the central central list and in the Kerala state list. So that's a problem.
Yes.
For many communities. We'll come to that. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So with your permission, I think we will now, Bismi, shall I answer these? I have 8 questions. Shall I quickly answer them?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. Himanshi, Miss Himanshi asked on the origin of the caste system. That's a very complicated question, but I'll tell you my own personal understanding and theory of it. Okay. Very quickly, it's 30, so I'll take maybe 1 or 2 minutes. See, to understand the caste system, we have to understand the meaning of the word jati. Now, this has not been discussed anywhere else. I have done a lot of research and come out with my own understanding. So take it as just my view. The word jati comes from the word jan, like janam, jan, Jan in English, jan in Sanskrit, plus katin. Katin is a suffix that converts something from a noun. It's a suffix that converts a noun into a verb noun. So for example, take kriti. Kr means creation. You add the suffix katin and it becomes kriti. It is that kr, creation, goes through an operationalization and becomes a kriti. So similarly, jan plus katin produces jati. Now there is a difference between jati and janam. Janam is birth, as we know. What is jati? So I can say Professor Bismi Gopalakrishnan ka janam hua, had her janam, right? But I won't say Professor Bismi ka jati hua. That's not right. So it's not birth. So what is jati? So jati is the janam ka riti. The method of birth is called jati. That's the meaning of jati. The jan means the method of birth, how you're born. So the elephants are born in a particular riti, horses are born in a particular way. Let's say butterflies are born in a particular way. Each of these, we can broadly say, species has a particular method of birth. That jan plus katin refers to something that is produced through a particular method of birth, particular jati. So you can say inka janam is jati mein hua. We can say this person's janam took place in this jati because the method of birth was that which belongs to everyone who is a member of that jati. So if something is born, you look at the method of birth. You've been born from a female elephant, and you look and through a process of the female elephant becoming fertilized and pregnant and then gives birth. So you say, because this is a method of production, this janam happened this way, but this is now part of the elephant jati. Okay. So point number one is jati means the method by which you're born. And so the theory that was brought forward, which underlies the Varnashrama Dharma, is that there are 5 jatis or 5 methods of production of human beings. 4 are from Purusha, the Virat Purusha, from the head, the shoulder, the thighs, and the feet. So the method of production is from the head, the shoulder, thighs, and feet, 4 different types of production. And a 5th type of human being comes from Prakriti, not from Purusha at all. So there are 5 types of methods by which human beings are born, different distinct methods. So they're like 5 species of human beings. And like elephants and butterflies can never do, butterfly can't say, I want to walk around like an elephant. You can't. You have to fly. Elephant says, I want to fly. No, you can't, because you belong to a jati, means you're produced, not just born, but created through a particular process. So we have 5 types of totally distinct species of human beings. And the 4 jatis that are the 4 types of humans whose jati is based on production from Purusha are given a special privilege, a title, because it's the highest type of, it's coming from Virat Purusha. So it's the highest type of creation. Only 4 human beings are produced by Virat Purusha. Everything else in nature is produced from Prakriti. Only 4 types of human beings are produced by Virat Purusha. So you give them a title, and you call these jati people. Jati means people are born in the same way. You call these 4 groups of people are born in 4 different ways from Purusha. You call them Varnas. It's a title to show that your method of production, your method of creation is different from the others. So you're given a Varna. And the Varna is not just a color, it's like a badge. So Brahmin, Baniya, Kshatriya, Shudra, you're given a badge, a title as a Varna. It's a title. So show that your method of production is from Purusha, not from Prakriti. So that's Jati and Varna. So it is from this now, gradually this increased. And those who are born from Prakriti started to get subdivided. They were actually just ordinary communities. But in order to manage them, they all got consolidated into jatis, which means people started to actually ascribe to them, while they had one system of production, they were implying that they are actually also produced in different ways. So that if you are in a manual scavenging community, you are produced in a completely different way than if you are in a, let's say, a community that produces, that does carvings for temples. So you call them jatis, again implying that there are not 5, but hundreds of subspecies, not subspecies, separate species. Humans are not one species, separate species of human beings. This is a structure that evolved from the theory of Chaturvarnya. Now, the theory is that God is there, and I'm not saying this in a light way or in a disparaging way, but God evaluates the Atmas that have to have a rebirth, looks at their guna and karma, and then divides them into 4 groups according to the guna and karma, 5 groups, and channels them into each type of, each method of birth according to their guna and karma of these 5 births, and people are born distinctly, and therefore they say those who are born in each type, each jati, each type of production cannot do the function of anyone else. They're as different as elephants are to butterflies, right? So, so this is the theory. Now, for those of you who are not from Kerala, very, very great philosopher of Kerala, late 19th century, early 20th century, Narayana Guru, he blew this up by saying there is only one jati for human beings. And what he was saying, and he said it in many other ways, is there is only one method of producing human beings. All human beings are born through the same method from a woman. There are no 5 methods of creating human beings. Now, if there are no 5 methods of creating human beings, this entire Purusha Sukta, Varnashrama Dharma, everything comes crumbling down. Because you may have very different guna and karma from your previous birth. But if, according to Narayana Guru, you're all fed into the same singular method of production, it makes no difference whether you're a sinner or a saint. You're all going to be born again through one method of creation, one method of creation. We're all one human beings. So what he said was scientifically true, was consistent with our own experience, but he fundamentally challenged and rejected the idea of Purusha Sukta, Chaturvarnya, 4 kinds of people. So jati is that. Now, what is samudaya? Samudaya is simply a community, social groups, Italian Americans, French and Spanish, every place in the world. Mr. Ochieng is here. There are tribes in Africa. There are social groups everywhere. But even in Africa, Mr. Ochieng is probably surprised to shocked to hear that we have a theory that says human beings are created in different species, not subspecies, and are totally different from each other. Very few, I'm not aware of any other country which has such an ideology, but they have social groups. But the social groups were consolidated into jatis. If you read the 1881 census of Travancore, Mr. Nagamaya, who wrote it, I've read it myself, and that's where I learned it. He says there are 377 or so samudaya communities in Travancore. He's going to consolidate them into 45 or so jatis. So he's going to create them into different groups, consolidated groups, on the assumption that they are doing certain work, and because they're doing certain work, they are not fit at creation to do any other work. They are different species of human beings. Therefore, like a butterfly cannot walk like an elephant cannot fly, a manual scavenger cannot try to be a priest or an intellectual or a Brahmin. Not possible. So this is how caste was created. As a result, the power, only certain human beings were created through jatis, methods of creation that will make them fit to rule, fit to read, fit to study, fit to understand. And so only they will rule, and you should not have others rule. So they don't like the idea of representation, because you are bringing undeserving people, unfit people to rule, because they're, it's like asking, animals to rule you, because they don't understand. They are not made to to do these kind of functions of governance. So this is so at the root of our system, according to me, is the belief in Purusha Sukta, 4 varnas, and then a panchama, and this theory that we are all different species created in entirely distinct ways, one from the mouth, one from the shoulder, one from the thighs, and one from the feet, and one from Prakriti, and so we are completely different species. No other people on earth, to my knowledge, has this kind of theory, and that's what is dividing our society. So I am now part of a movement that in Kerala is making a pledge that we will be the last generation to live in Varnashrama. We will not allow our children to believe this, because it makes 80% of the people as separate species and some lesser species. So they cannot accept it, and we will not accept it. And therefore, we want to accept what science says, what Narayana Guru says, that all human beings have only one jati. There is only one jati of human beings, meaning one system of production. So that is the theory of jati. It is jan plus katin. It means method of birth. There's only one method of birth. That is what is leading to all these problems of division and then lack of representation, because people who are denying representation, they believe that these other people do not have the capability. They're not created. It's like expecting a Maruti 800 to fly from here to the United States. Can't do it. So it's ridiculous if you say that Maruti 800 must also fly to the United States. Only a very big jet plane can fly from here to the United States. So let me stop there. So that's the, Ms. Himanshi, are you satisfied with that answer?
Sir, one small
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for such a detailed explanation.
Okay.
Sir, one small
Let me 1 second. Mr. Ravi, we'll come back to for second round if there is time. Let me answer all the other questions as best as I can. This is the most detailed because I wanted to share my own personal sort of understanding and theory of caste and jati. Caste means pure and all that. It's an English word. It's varna and jati. Jati is a method, is people who are born in the same method of birth, and varna is a title given to only those who are created by the 4 methods of birth through Purusha, to show that they are created from Purusha. No one else has varna. So that's the relationship between jati and varna. And samudaya is different from all this. They are being put into, they're being attributed different kinds of method of birth wrongly. But actually, samudaya exists all over the world, and there's nothing wrong with that. Human beings need groups to live. So Mr. Azad Singh said, will democracy have an adverse impact on minority? No, that is why we have representation. See, when we say majority and minority, is hard to define. In India, everybody is a minority, and everybody is a majority. If the Hindi-speaking people, if you're a Muslim Hindi-speaking person, when it comes to language, you're majority. I'm someone from Kerala, I'm a minority. When it comes to broadly understood religion, Muslim may be a large minority. I may be part of a majority. So depending on how you slice it, on we have minorities and we have very distinct, diverse groups in our country. So the only way to solve it, given that we are not homogeneous, that's where the genius of Dr. Ambedkar from 100 years ago, he kept on saying, we will have an oligarchy, and we know from a lot of academic work that oligarchies exist only to benefit themselves, and it will never benefit all the people. And the only reason why India is not able to move forward like other countries is that we have oligarchies ruling us, and only their lives are improving. The lives of others will not and cannot improve, not because they're bad people, but because they are naturally, everyone in power looks after their own interests. That's sort of almost predictable. So if everyone is represented, we can move together as a group. So, and also to protect minorities, Dr. Ambedkar says not only due representation by proportion of population, which could lead to majoritarianism, but also adequate representation, which means that even small communities must be able to have effective voice in the governance of the country. So I think we have a good formula in representative democracy, which actually pulls against mere majoritarianism. I got 2/3 majority, I can do anything I want. We say, no, you can't. You have to have a representative state, a representative judiciary, representative legislature, representative executive. So I think if you say democracy, you have to be clear. See, there are various aspects of democracy. There's electoral democracy, there's representative democracy, there is economic democracy, there is social democracy. Now, of all this, we only have electoral democracy in our country. So we are only 1/4 of the way to democracy. Unless we have all the other 3, we will not really be a democracy. And we are not really a democracy from that perspective. Mr. Abnish said, is the preamble a social contract? I would say the preamble is a social declaration because, as I said, 5 different, and there's no time, that's a whole different lecture in and by itself. To understand the Constitution, there are 5 different forces that are colliding with each other in this country, and they're also colliding with each other in the Constitution and in the preamble. Why did the preamble get accepted then in a unanimous way? It was a tactical decision. Some people are dead set against the preamble. That's why some people had to amend the preamble to include socialist and secular because of the huge opposition to it. So the preamble represents a very the vision of the poor people of this country. Many people want equality but not liberty. So the left usually wants equality but not liberty. The right wants liberty but not equality. And some want democracy, some don't want democracy. Basically, it is the scheduled caste groups led by Dr. Ambedkar. They want everything. They want equality, they want liberty, they want which is the view of the vast majority of the people of the country. 80% of the people want all this for themselves, but there is an elite group that is opposing to it. So it's not yet fully a social contract. I would say the preamble reflects a vision of the common masses of India. There's no doubt about it, because that's why they're defending the Constitution, mainly because of its preamble and the content of its preamble. And it reflects their vision. But are they adequate? Are the 80% common people of this country adequate to constitute a full social contract? Probably not. But hopefully someday it will become a full-fledged social contract. Mr. Rahman wanted to know what is the alternative tool for representation. A very good example is what Mahathir Mohamad did in Malaysia in the 70s, when he found that there was a Chinese economic oligarchy and the Malays were very poor. And they did not have representation. Instead of reservation, which is a very moderate form of representation, Mahathir Mohamad made a rule that no business can be formed in Malaysia without a Malay who's called a Bhumi Putra. We understand that word, son of the soil, a Malay as a partner. He need not provide any funds, any investment, but you must have a Malay partner in every business as an equity partner. And that Malay partner will get the profits of that company without contributing anything. That's representation, economic representation. Now, 40 years later, 50 years later, the condition of Malays has improved a lot. The condition of Malaysia has improved a lot. There was riots against the Chinese in the 60s because they were an economic oligarchy. Today, there are no riots against the Chinese. Malaysia is at racial, ethnic peace. So if people don't like representation, we could have a Bhumiputra policy like Mahathir and say all the unrepresented communities will have the right to have a partner in every business established in India, and that will rapidly bring about change in giving empowerment and representation, political empowerment and representation. Please remember, this is not about economic justice, it's about political justice. Representation and reservation is a tool of political justice, which is the point that the Supreme Court missed. That this is not about poverty alleviation. It is about political justice. And you're denying political justice to the masses of this country by giving a 10% set aside for the ruling classes. That's denying political democracy and political justice. So that's the example of alternate tools. Mr. Girish wanted to know, does the judiciary have the last word on social transformation? Actually, I would look at this in terms of broad social groups. We do not have a representative judiciary. If you went by Dr. Ambedkar's principle of adequate and due and adequate representation, you can imagine a Supreme Court of 34 judges who about 8 of them should be from SC and ST community. Today we have 2. 20 of them should be from Avarna OBC communities. Today we have, I don't know how many, maybe 1 or 2. 5 should be from the Abrahamic minorities. Today we have probably 1 Muslim, and I'm not sure if we have any Christian at all, maybe 1 at the most, but I'm not sure, but maybe 1. And we should really have no more than one from the Dvija classes, one Supreme Court judge. The others should all be from these other groups. This is the broad way in which you would have a representative Supreme Court, like the United States Supreme Court does. They have not only 4 women out of 9 judges, they have 2 African Americans who only constitute about 12% of the population. But one is a woman and the other is a man. So they said when the last white man left, they said, no, we need a black woman. There was a consensus in the country, and they appointed a black woman to represent the black women who are a very important, very dynamic, very powerful force in the country on the Supreme Court. And when she was sworn in, she said publicly, now we have a seat at the table, she said, on behalf of not only women, but African-American women. So, and by the way, the US Supreme Court does not have a single judge who has been born into the most powerful community, which is called WASP, White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. So it's almost an entirely minority court because they believe in representation, right? All these Western countries give a lot of importance to representation, which is why Sunak is the Prime Minister of the UK. And, there is an Indian origin guy who's the Prime Minister of Ireland, and now probably in Scotland also there is some Pakistani origin guy, because they believe in inclusion and representation. So, I do think that we have to consider. So I would say the social group has a veto on, the oligarchy has a veto on policies, on social transformation. They have a veto on social transformation. It may come through the executive, judiciary, or legislature, but they have a veto. So I wouldn't single out the judiciary, because there are many occasions where the judiciary has been in favor of social transformation when some of those judges did not think, look at issues from the point of view of which is prevalent in the oligarchy, from which most of them come. But they looked at it from the point of view of those who are excluded from the oligarchy. And there are many judges who do that as well. So, then we come to Ms. Toshita. 9th schedule, I've already answered that very quickly, saying that yes, the idea is to protect it from a lot of quibbles about constitutionality, but certainly they cannot violate basic structure. It is to enable social transformation from being challenged constantly in courts, and courts sort of striking them out for all kinds of reasons in the early years. Mr. Ochieng asked, does law lead or lag social transformation? Very good question. Mr. Ochieng, my view is that law and social transformation are not different things. The constitution and social transformation are not different things. Social transformation is a process in which the law and the constitution are very centrally embedded. It's a socio-political process in which the law and the constitution are integral parts and are tools used along with economic resources, along with media, along with public discourse and public intellectuals, theater, art, drama, all this shape social transformation. The law is just one of these tools used by different communities who seek to bring about social transformation. So I don't see the law, simply because there is legislation or judiciary, as having a special or isolated role in social transformation. Law is part of society. And society is transforming. As I said, the very vision of the most important legal document, the Constitution, in Article 38, is that the state shall promote the welfare of the people by securing as effectively as it may a social order in which justice, social, economic, and political shall inform all institutions of national life. So the what that provision does is put the Constitution at the center of social transformation as an integral part of it. I won't say there's no center. It's a kind of it's a round sphere. If you think of it as a round sphere, there's no real center, but makes the Constitution an integral part of social transformation, not a separate part of it. And what does the Constitution do? It gives us tools to use for social transformation. The Constitution is like a spoon and a knife when you go to a meal. It's part of your lunch. But it just gives you the tools, the plate, the knife and the spoon with which you can eat lunch. But you can't just have the plate and the spoon. If there's no food, you won't have lunch. So all this together you call lunch. And so all this together you call society. But when you want to fight for social transformation, the constitution gives you, there are, as I said, other tools: culture, art, cinema, education, media, literature. All these are tools we use for social transformation. Law is just one of them. That's all. So that's my view, Mr. Ochieng, on that. Last question, Mr. Sanjay Rao. I think that was more a very specific question on this OBC list being different in state and center. As I said, that's part of that structure, and the method you've adopted is the right one, which is to request the state commissions to act on it. But the question you raise is, why if you're not getting reservation, you should be entitled to. Everyone who does not actually get reservation as OBC or SC/ST should be entitled to EWS if you satisfy the criteria, the creamy layer criteria, exclusion criteria. That's the argument which I'm intending to take to the courts. But that's my argument. So you are, Mr. Rao, you should test it.
Okay,
I'm happy if you talk to me separately. I'm happy to test it for you. You should say if your income criteria are within the limit and not excluded, then you should say, look, I am not getting any reservation under OBC or SC/ST. So as long as I don't get reservation, I'm entitled to EWS.
So
I feel that EWS should be given to all people who are below that criterion, regardless of your social, caste, religion, etc. background. All people should be entitled to it. It's unconstitutional because it misses the point that it is about political representation, not economic upliftment. Therefore, it's unconstitutional, violates the basic structure. It discriminates against people without any justification in terms of employment and education. The justification being that you can only discriminate in favor of those who are socially, educationally, and even 46 economically backward. But social exploitation and social injustice is a primary criterion to be entitled to representation, because you are, and that must result in lack of representation. Therefore, I do believe that giving any reservation without being linked to representation is a violation of the right to equality. There is no justification for including people who are overrepresented. I say that. But now that it has been upheld as constitutional, my position is that EWS should be given to all poor people, regardless of social background, because either you take into account social background, in which case you only give it to social and educationally backward classes, or you do not take social into account, in which case you give it to all economically weaker sections. But you can't have it both ways. You can't give EWS only for social and educationally forward sections, because that sets back the constitutional vision for social transformation. So rather than law, I would say the Constitution provides a very important vision for social transformation. But so does literature, so does cinema. But the Constitution also is an important source of vision for social transformation. And that is violated by EWS. So we are willing, I'm happy, Mr. Rao, if you want to test that, if you qualify as a poor person, then certainly we can test it to see.
Yes, sir. It's not only for me. I want to actually, as you said, not just reservation. It's a representation that I am looking for.
Yes, representation also.
Yeah,
but
I may be middle class. I may not be very poor, but there are people who are poor in my community.
Yes. So no, the representation must come for the community. Community must have representation. You and I, all of us must have representation. Your community must have representation. But the political class and the judiciary does not accept our right to representation. That has been buried. Only Dr. Ambedkar spoke about it. It's been buried. And the whole dialogue has been shifted to economic upliftment. The issue of representation of all communities has been buried by the left-wing parties, the right-wing parties, and the centrist parties. They've all buried that issue. So people like you who are from communities, I'm particularly fighting for small communities, and who are not represented. You must demand representation and voice quite apart from your economic status. Even if you're Parsi or you're rich community, you must have representation, as Dr. Ambedkar said, in the judiciary, in the executive. Legislature is different. Because you're powerful, you can fund, you can do all kinds of ways. You're not deprived from the chance to be elected. It's a way to be elected. But judiciary and executive, we have to make sure that the recruitment processes, Ambedkar emphasized the recruitment process, must be such that all are represented. So yes, I agree with you. I think I'm done with the questions. Bismi, we are at 9 o'clock now. We are half an hour.
Yes, yes.
I'm okay. I'm sorry to have spilled over by half an hour, but with your permission and
No issues, sir. We have a lot of more questions, and we have many more. They have raised my hands also. I think there are a lot of doubts
yes,
still, but I think uh, personally, maybe they can contact you, sir, because.
certainly, yeah.
So thank you so much, sir, for patiently clarifying all our doubts. And I now invite Hari, first semester LLM student, School of Indian Legal, to offer formal vote of thanks.
Yeah, I'll just say one thing. Ms. Ria Raymol has said all people cannot be given EWS as there will be double reservation to already reservations availing communities for centuries. What I'm saying is reservation is for individuals because their communities are not represented. If the communities are represented, they should not get reservations. So if you take the EWS classes, they are already hugely represented. For example, in Kerala, there has never been a scheduled caste chief secretary in Kerala since 1956. Ever. There has never been a Malayali Muslim chief secretary in Kerala since 1956. There has only been one Irava chief secretary in Kerala since 1956. Right? And there have been no other there's only one other backward class chief secretary in Kerala since 1956. So there has never been, other than two Dalits and two scheduled caste, two Muslims, there is no other representation in the Supreme Court from Kerala. There has never been anyone except those who are from these dominant classes. So if you look at the representation, Ms. Ria, and you look at who is not represented, you give them representation. So, and only if they have representation, there should not be double representation. But you cannot look at it as individuals. You're looking representation of communities. That's the principle of the Constitution. And some communities are dominating. But so we should give EWS to everyone, 10% who are the poor people, because that's what you're saying. But if I agree with you, if you want, you can exclude the poor who are overrepresented. That's what I argued in the Supreme Court, because they will get, as you said, for centuries, they've had double and triple reservation. But if they are from this Kumbara community who have never had any representation, don't exclude them in favor of very powerful communities who have excessive reservation, as you say, double, triple, quadruple representation for centuries. Okay, thank you. That's a very important point. Thank you for that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Now I invite Hari, first semester LLM student, School of Indian Legal Thought, to offer the formal vote of thanks. Hari?
Good evening all. So my name is Harikrishnan CM. I am first year LLM student at School of Legal Thought, Kottayam. I have been assigned with the humble task of proposing the vote of thanks to the honorable dignitaries present here in this online conference on short-term online certificate course on law and social transformation. Firstly, I propose my sincere gratitude to Professor Bismi Gopalakrishnan, Professor and HOD, Department of Lifelong Learning and Extension, Mahatma Gandhi University, for organizing and standing as a backbone towards the formation and conduction of such an informative and intuitive program that makes us enlighten and understand about the basic principles and fundamentals in law and social transformation in the contemporary and modern world. This program couldn't have been fruitful and magnificent unless for the efforts and coordination of Professor Bismi Gopalakrishnan. Once again, I thank you, ma'am. Nextly, I convey my heartfelt gratitude to Professor Abhilash Babu sir, Professor at School of Social Sciences and UGC Stride Coordinator, Mahatma Gandhi University, for the aspiring and thoughtful presidential address. In this address, sir stated significant learnings from the recent cases, such as the law is the reflection and will of the society, which is a very much relevant fact when it comes to discussion of law and social transformation. Sir also added meaningful words such as the law changing the society and society changing the law is a sign of maturity as part of law and social transformation in the modern times. Finally, I express my heartfelt gratitude to Professor G.Mohan Gopal sir former Vice-Chancellor of National Law School, Bengaluru, also former Director of National Judicial Academy of the Supreme Court of India, for the aspiring and enlightening words. His knowledgeable words on the concept of justice and recognition of law as a set of rules that ensures human conduct in the society in the consistency of the values that sets out the idea of justice. It was intuitive and informative to learn about the major core values, namely liberty, fraternity, and equality. Sir mentioned all this. Also, Sir's class was divided into 3 parts. The part 1 referred about justice, society, and constitution, in which she explains the importance of constitution and the rights of every citizen of India. The part 2 mentioned about the reservation and what is the difference between reservation and representation. Also, he mentioned about the constitutional history where Dr. B.R. Ambedkar took the initiative of representing the socially and economically backward classes as the depressed classes, in which he mentioned the importance of an adequate representation in the Legislative Assembly for the depressed classes, which is the point raised by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in the formation of the Constitution. And the issue is not reservation but representation to these legislative assemblies. Also, in part 3, Sir discussed about the economically weaker sections and about Article 46 of the Constitution. He also mentioned the difference between economically weaker sections and the weaker sections that clearly. So, thank Mohan Gopal sir. I think that for today's meeting.
Bismi, can I take 1 minute, because there are 2 comments which I think require a little. I'm going through the very nice comments in the chat box.
Yes, I told you there are several comments.
Yes,
and
just
several
one or two which I think require.
Yes.
One is a very important. 2 which I think need to be clarified. One is if Miss Meenachi Priyatarshini says, if it is based on the method of birth, doesn't this Varna system based on the work a person does? So actually what we have been told is that you have taken people doing the same vocation and they have formed a group, a jati. But that's not really what the Purusha Sukta says. As I said, Purusha Sukta says that there are jati means method of birth. So what you do is the opposite actually. Once you say a person belongs to a particular jati, from Prakriti, you're born from Prakriti, then you're only good enough for certain kinds of work. You have no option in society. So actually those people do multiple types of work, but you have no option to be a scholar or a soldier or a merchant and so on, or an official. You don't have any of those options because you are born from Prakriti. So you're not produced, manufactured. You're like Maruti 800. You can't be a Mercedes Benz. You have to be a Maruti 800. Don't aspire to be a Mercedes Benz. So then you do the work of Maruti 800. But the theory that we are told is you took all the people who are doing a work and you classified them. That is wrong. There was never amongst poor people, no one does only one type of work. It's impossible to live. They, during certain seasons they work as agricultural labor. In other seasons they work as construction labor. They work in factories. They work in homes. They work. People do multiple types of work. Wherever they can find work, they move and do multiple types of work. So this theory is completely wrong, and I think it is simply to justify why you're denying the best opportunities to 80% of the people. You're telling them you cannot do those jobs because it is like an elephant wanting to fly like a butterfly or a butterfly wanting to be the elephant in the forest. Not possible. So that's my comment on that. Mr. Srivastav has raised a question, very important question, that about dominant other backward classes in northern India are socially, economically and politically well off. Take the example of Yadavs. They are overrepresented in Bihar Legislative Assembly and make a mammoth share in the share of OBCs and so on. Now, Mr. Srivastav, if that is the case, what we should do is to bring OBC reservations into the assembly and then ensure that all OBC communities are represented according to their population share. So I think Yadavs have 15% or so. They're the largest community in Bihar according to the census. They should have no more than 15%. I agree with you. But but you look at take many other assemblies, you'll find that people from the dominant communities are also very disproportionately represented in assembly and in the cabinet and in the bureaucracy. But they should all be brought down to their, including Yadavs, to their due share according to the census, the official census. Then we will have, like in America, in Western countries, other countries who have moved forward, we'll have a legislature where Mr. Rao's community will be able to say, no, this policy we don't want because it will affect us. Take into account our concerns. Not take into account, he is part of the decision-making process. Then we will move forward together as a country. If everyone has a share in power. Otherwise, we are accepting the Purusha Sukta theory that only 4 communities have been created by God with the capacity to govern. No one else has the capacity. Therefore, they are there by merit. That's not acceptable to the 80%. Now, when we take the case of Yadavs, Mr. Srivastava, to my knowledge, I have never come across a Supreme Court judge with the name Yadav from 1950 till today. Not one. How many of them are there in business, top levels of business? How many of them are there in top levels of academia? How many Yadavs are anchors in lead television programs or media? So you'll find that, yes, why have they come forward in the assembly? Because there's democracy there. But wherever there is no democracy or representation, they're all excluded. And that's not good for the country, because the country cannot be run by a small group of people, however nice they are. That small group of people also must be represented. We don't want them to be isolated. We don't want them to be unrepresented. All of them, even these dominant classes, must have their adequate due representation. But let's all have representation. Let's accept that, as Narayana Guru said, we're all produced through one method. All humans have only one method of creation and birth. As a species, we are one species, right? And if we accept that, we are all equally entitled to do all work, to be a scholar, to be a priest, to be an intellectual, to be an artist, to be a laborer. So somebody who's today a Brahmin may do a work of a manual scavenger or laborer. Nothing wrong with that. If that's what that's what he does. I don't want anyone to do that kind of job personally. I don't want anyone to be forced to do that kind of job. But that cannot be reserved for a community. We have to end all those kinds of demeaning work has to be ended. But if everyone is forced to do that kind of work, we will end that demeaning work very soon. It will not be tolerated by society. So that's why we need representation, that those who are forced to do demeaning work are also part of the decision-making process. So I agree with your concern, but the solution is, let's bring OBC reservation into the assembly and make sure that the Yadavs are kept within their due share of 15%. They don't go beyond that. But everyone else should have their representation also. Thank you very much for these questions that have allowed me to address it in a broader way. And sorry to intrude into more time, but I thought I should answer these 2 questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much. And do I have your permission to exit? Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for this joining this inaugural session. Tomorrow we will meet at 7 o'clock with a new link, so that we can address the current technical problem that we are facing. So thank you very much. See you tomorrow.
Ma'am, may I have, can I ask a question?
So sir is left, sir.
Sorry, ma'am.
The resource person is left.
No. The question is to you, ma'am.
Yes.
Is the recording session of
Yes, we'll share it currently. We'll share it right now because many of the participants could not join this link. So we'll share the recording version by tomorrow morning, so that all the registered participants can go through.
Ma'am, only this session or the whole session?
This session.
All right. Thank you.